Next year, so I really like the Romans. I do quite a lot of television work talking about the classical world and the Romans, and I lead tours as well. And I'm an active practical archaeologist as well. So the show and tell table at the back, where I'm selling some books as well, is from a Roman villa I'm excavating in Kent, and I'm actually detailing all the finds there at the moment over the winter. But I put them there so that you can see the artifacts that you might find when you're looking locally. So it's to get your eye in, as it were. But today's talk is a talk I've given a few times now about the 9th Legion, which you would know from Rosemary Sutcliffe's amazing book, The Eagle of the Ninth. So the 9th Legion was one of about 30 Roman legions, and it's the only Roman legion, as we'll see, which disappears, and we don't know what happened to it. So it's 5,500 men disappear from history, and we don't know what happened to it. So I wrote this book here, basically to work out if Rosemary Sutcliffe was right. So she had a theory, which was in the Eagle of the Ninth book, which was then in Hollywood movies, etc. Was it right? So the book is like a historical detective story, looking at all the main theories of what happened to the Legion. It's very important to us here, because this is our Legion. So the 9th Legion is the one which moved from Leicester in the late AD 40s through to Lincoln about 2 years later, so it took 2 years to do, and it founded Leicester and it founded Lincoln, and on the way it came through here. So in the conquest phase I'm going to talk about, the 9th Legion is the one that was here, and I'm going to show you at the end a few slides I've added from the initial research which 2 or 3 of us, Tim, Andy, Peter, Rosemary, we've been looking around already to find evidence of what the 9th Legion was doing here. So I'm going to show you the early findings, because there's some really amazing stuff. And in particular, we've been very lucky to see some artifacts found by people locally, which include pieces of Roman armour, which is going to be from a legionary of the 9th Legion, and also a Roman sighting device as well. So I'll show you that at the end of the presentation. But first, the Eagle of the Ninth. So we start off, that's the cover of my book, what really happened to Legio IX Hispana. Why is it called Hispana? Well, it fought at some stage in its career in Spain so well that it was given a cognomen being a nickname. So it's called Legio IX Hispana. So it's the 9th Legion which fought well in Spain. And there is a Roman Aquila eagle. That's one that was found in Silchester. That's the one which inspired Rosemary Sutcliffe to write the Eagle of the Ninth. So that is the eagle standard of a Roman legion. And a Roman legion has a number of different standards, but it only has one eagle standard. And the eagle standard only comes out of the fort if the entire legion is on the march. It almost has religious significance for the legion. So if the eagle is lost, the legion is lost. So that's why it is so important. Okay, so the Eagle of the Ninth. So today's talk will be about 45 minutes, and I'll take any questions afterwards. The talk will go as follows. Why is the fate of the 9th Legion so popular? It's a generational thing of everybody growing up with the Eagle of the Ninth book. I'll talk about the chronology of the Legion. So most of my slides are pictures I'll talk to. There are 1 or 2 wordy ones, but that's only to tell you the chronology of the Legion, so you can understand how unusual it was for it to disappear. I'll talk about Roman legionaries. I've got some props to show you how Roman legionaries fought. I'll talk about the 4 theories I worked on, hypotheses, about what happened to the Legion. And then finally I'll focus on the 9th Legion and North East Derbyshire, when it was our Legion. And there, I'm going to divide that last section into 3 time periods. The conquest period, so the Romans landed here in AD 43 in Kent, and it's the late AD 40s they moved through the East Midlands to the North Sea coast. So that's the conquest phase of the late AD 40s. And I think the 9th in that phase would have been here for about a year. Then you have a frontier zone period when, having founded Lincoln, the Romans had a stop line called the Fossway Frontier, which is where the Fossway is today. So the Roman frontier then went from effectively the Humber down to the Severn. And we're part of that frontier again, and that's for about 20 years. And then later, in the AD 80s, the Romans pushed further north into the land of the Brigantes towards what is later to become Hadrian's Wall, and then trying to conquer Scotland. And then we become part of the province of Britannia. So we're a normal part of Roman Britain. So you move from military to farming and maybe a bit of industry, and we'll talk about that later. So let's begin. So, where does the interest in the Ninth Legion come from? We have this antiquarian called John Horsley in the 1730s who wrote a book called Britannia Romana, and basically he, at that time in the 18th century, tracked down the fate of every Roman legion that had come to Britain. And of the 30 or so legions the Romans had, probably about 5 came here, and at any one time the maximum was 4 and normally 3. So he tracked down what happened to them, but he couldn't work out what happened to the 9th Legion. So the mystery begins. Then in the 1850s, there's a German scholar called Theodor Mommsen, who's a scary looking chap, as you'll see in a minute, and he's the one who developed the theory that the 9th Legion was lost in the north of Britain, and his theory was that it was destroyed when the local tribes around York attacked York. But that's probably not true because there's not much evidence of it. But that's where the idea of it being lost in the north of Britain came from. And that's Theodor Mommsen, looking very scary. There is John Horsley's book. So this is the beginning of the story of the 9th Legion going missing. But it comes to popular attention with the wonderful Rosemary Sutcliffe. So when Rosemary Sutcliffe wrote The Eagle of the Ninth, in 1954, written in 1954, it was a bestseller. It's a children's book, the first of a trilogy, but it really caught the imagination of an entire generation. And since then, its interest has cascaded all the way through to the present day. So you end up with Channing Tatum in The Eagle, Michael Fassbender in The Centurion. I mean, that's probably 13 years ago now, and it's still one of my favourite Roman movies, because it's a very good recreation. And in fact, one of my tweets, when I published this book, I actually tagged Channing Tatum. I've got about 5,000 followers at X. He's got about 5 million. And he reposted it.
Oh.
He's very kind. So he actually very kindly sold me a book. So now we'll move on to the chronology of the Legion. So there are 3 or 4 pages here which are a bit wordy, if you'll bear with me. So the 9th Legion is founded in 90 or 89 BC. So it's the beginning of the 1st century BC. And it takes part in a war in Italy called the Social War. That's the first time it's recorded. It then participates in Julius Caesar's conquests of Gaul, including his 55 and 54 BC invasions of Britain. So the 9th Legion first comes to Britain with Julius Caesar. But then, after he's assassinated, it's disbanded. We don't know why. Even more mysteriously, Octavian, who is the inheritor of Caesar's power ultimately when he becomes Augustus, the first emperor, he reforms the Legion quite quickly, and then it serves all the way through the civil wars, through to 27 BC, when Augustus, as Octavian is now known, becomes the first Roman emperor. So the Legion is spanning from the Republic, and now we're into the Roman Empire. It fights with Augustus in his Cantabrian Wars in the north of Spain, and that's where it gets the cognomen Hispana, because it's fought so well. It's then redeployed, so it's very common. We're talking about the Roman world now. I'll show you maps in a minute. But we're spanning three continents. So we've got Europe, up to the Rhine Danube, and latterly including Britain. We've got North Africa, which is a full, fat, functioning part of the Mediterranean world of the Roman Empire. Remember, the Roman Empire is a Mediterranean empire. And then you've also got Asia. So you've got Asia Minor, you've got the Near East, you've got the Middle East as well. This is a huge empire with borders from the north of Britain through to Syria, through to the Sahara Desert. It's very normal for Roman military units to deploy across the whole empire over a period of time. So here we have the 9th Legion moving to Aquila in northeastern Italy, and then it's deployed onto Pannonia, which is basically near Austria on the upper Danube. It's then sent to North Africa. So it's sent to North Africa because of a rebellion by this chap here called Tacfarinas, and it participates in the siege and sacking of his capital, Maduros, which is the image at the bottom. That's one of my pictures from one of my research trips. That's in Algeria today. That's in the Atlas Mountains on a beautiful day with copper blue skies. And then it's moved again, so it goes back to Pannonia, so it's jumping around. But that's very, very normal for a Roman legion. But then we come to Britain. So we're now getting within 2 or 3 years of the Legion being here. And remember, we've jumped from North Africa to the Danube, to Italy, to Gaul, and now we're going to come to Britain. So Claudius invades Britain in AD 43. It's the third invasion of Roman Britain. The first two were Caesar, 1, Caesar, 2. Then AD 43, Claudius, as in I, Claudius, who was very ill-favoured, and it was a real Hail Mary for Claudius to invade Britain. I always say in my broader talks on Roman Britain that Britain is the Wild West of the Roman Empire. You're a long way from the imperial centre, and there's always a very large military presence because the far north is never fully conquered. So it's literally the Wild West of the Roman Empire. So Claudius decides to invade Britain because he needs a big win, because he's been made the emperor by the Praetorian Guard, very ill-favoured, he wasn't expected to become the emperor, so he goes for it, and he invades Britain, and it actually works. But he invades Britain with 40,000 men. It's worth thinking about how many troops that is. The largest battle on British soil, including both sides, that we know about in history is the Battle of Towton, when there were probably 30,000 overall, including both sides. So this is Claudius and his Claudian invasion with 40,000 men, half legionaries and half auxiliaries, and I'll explain what the difference is in a minute. So he invades Britain with the 9th Legion as one of his 4 legions. And then they, within 3 or 4 months in AD 43 in October, having landed on the east coast of Kent, worked their way over the River Medway, worked their way over the Thames, and finally get to what is now Colchester, which was then called Camalodunum, which is the tribal centre of a tribe called the Catabalani, which are the tribe immediately below us here with the Coritani. And then they declare the province, and that's it. They stop. So the province initially is only the southeast, and the first capital is Colchester, not London. London's not been founded yet. Colchester. And then in the later AD 40s, the 9th Legion and the other 3 legions in Britain, 2 Augusta in the southwest, and into the West Midlands and towards Wales, 14 Germina and 20 Valeria Victrix. And with us, the 9th, they're told to start expanding the province. So they do. And the 9th Legion goes around the Iceni territory in the north of Norfolk, because that's a Roman client state at the time, and they go into the Midlands. So they found Longthorpe, Water-Newton, Peterborough, then they found Leicester, and then they dogleg back. And they ultimately found Newton-on-Trent. So when you cross the Trent, Newton-on-Trent, that is a huge Roman fort. And then they go on to Lincoln, and they found Lincoln. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the urban landscape of modern Britain, nearly every town or city was originally a Roman fort on a river. They're always on rivers because the easiest way to transport goods, the cheapest way, the most economic way is by water. So they're always on rivers. And if you want to do the exercise in your own head, you can go from the southwest to the northeast, Exeter, Roman fort, Cardiff, Roman fort, Gloucester, Roman fort. It's like a call and response thing now. Manchester, Roman fort, Leicester, Roman fort, Carlisle, Roman fort, Newcastle, Roman fort, York, Roman fort. They're all Roman forts on rivers, which then develop a civilian settlement to support the fort, which then outlasts the fort, and they become towns. Okay, so the modern urban landscape of Britain is largely built around Roman forts. And all the A road network are largely the Roman roads which link them. So the Fosse Way, Ermine Street, the A1, the Watling Street, the A2 and the A6. They're all Roman roads linking all these Roman forts. So here we have Leicester and Lincoln. And that's important to us because we're in the middle of that journey. When the Legion's on the march with its supporting troops, it's on a 30 or 40 kilometre wide front. So it's not a narrow snaking column, it's going on a really broad front with cavalry on the flanks to make sure the flanks are secure. If they've got rivers, they'd have units of the Roman fleet on the rivers to again make sure the units of the flanks are secure. always scouting ahead, and in the middle of it the Legion, but it's on a 30-kilometre wide front, or even 40 kilometres. So we're on the northern part of the 9th, moving from Leicester to Lincoln. So we'll begin on the east coast of Kent. So this is one of my favourite places in the whole of Roman Britain. Actually, this is Richborough. Richborough is great if you get a chance to go in Kent on the east coast, because it's a time machine of the entire Roman presence in Britain in one place. And there's one thing on the top picture I want to talk about, but I'll describe what you're looking at. So you have the two ditches there. They're from the Claudian invasion. They're the beachhead defences of the Claudian invasion, which would have looked like the picture on the bottom. So that's what it would have looked like when Claudius invaded in AD 43. And then going forward in time, you have the cross. That is the base of a monumental arch, the largest monumental arch in Roman Europe, including in Rome itself, which was clad in Carrara marble from Italy, and you'd have been able to see it from the coast of France glittering. That's there to celebrate the Romans very briefly conquering the far north of Britain, which was under Agricola, subject to my first book next year, due out in February, and I'm proofreading it at the moment. Agricola conquering the far north of Scotland very briefly, so they built a monumental arch. That was turned into a watchtower by the usurper Carausius in the AD 290s, and he built the triple ditching bank. And then later it becomes a Saxon shore fort with the arch knocked down and all the stone reused to build the walls you can see. So that is the beginning and the end of the Roman presence in Britain in one place. It's relevant to us because I'm going to start talking in a minute. Andy, Tim, ditches and banks. So when I talk about a Roman ditch and bank from a Roman fort, that's what it looks like. It's a very deep ditch, and then the earth creates a bank on the inside, and then on top of the bank you build a palisade from stakes which each individual Roman soldier carries. So that is what a Roman defence looks like. So when we start looking at crop marks around here, that's what we're looking for. And again, when I talk about a ditch and bank, that's the recreated gateway from the Claudian invasion ditch and bank beachhead defences from the AD 40s. That's the size of bank I'm talking about that you're then looking for as a crop mark today. So to my point about the Romans invading Britain with a series of stop lines, the map on the right is brilliant because each colour is a different phase of conquest. The Romans found it very difficult to conquer Britain, and they never conquered the far north, modern Scotland, apart from very, very briefly under Agricola. And I actually think personally, even within the territory of the province in the north of England, the territory of this tribe here, the Brigantes, I think they had trouble there all the time anyway. So the far north had this huge military presence because of the unconquered north. But even to get there, so the line of Hadrian's Wall is there, Solway first to the Tyne, that took 40 years to get there. And what you're looking at is a series of advances, halt for a generation, advances, halt for a generation. And we are this tribe here, the Coriel Tauvi or the Coritani. So we're the tribe in the Midlands, more like a confederation of different tribes, who the Roman geographer Ptolemy gives a single name, which is the name we use today. And we're just north of the Catabalorni, which is the tribe which Claudius conquered in AD 43. So the red line is the first push, AD 43, stop. The yellow is the later AD 40s, push, stop. And then these are a series of pushes into Wales, stop, and finally under Agricola and the Flavians, they push into the far north, where they finally, for about 2 months, can claim to have conquered the whole of Britain before the emperor, having built his arch to celebrate how clever he was, Domitian, one of my least favourite Roman emperors, they were told by Domitian to come back down because he couldn't afford the manpower. So they came back down to the line which later becomes Hadrian's Wall. So you have a series of advances and stops, and for us the key one, for the forts around here I'm going to show you later, is that phase with the yellow, which stops in the late AD 40s. So moving on. The interesting thing now with the Ninth Legion is, although it's probably the most famous Roman legion because of the Eagle of the Ninth, actually it's not very good. So quite often it gets pushed right to the limit and only just recovers, and so on until it disappears. So it participates in the Boudicca revolt. So Boudicca, the Queen of the Iceni, led a revolt in AD 60-61, which almost brought the province down. If the Romans had lost the final battle against her, the province would have fallen, and I don't think the Romans would have come back. So that would have been the end of Roman Britain for me. But fortunately, the governor who fought her, Paulinus, was on his A game, and the battle he fought was one of the most successful Roman battles going. So he won, and Boudicca lost. But on the way, the Ninth Legion, which at the time was in Lincoln, came down to try and stop Boudicca sacking Colchester, got there too late, and then fought a battle, and the troops who were sent down, about half the legion, were wiped out. And the legate, the general in charge of the legion, Cerealis, who later becomes a governor in Britain and does a good job, here doesn't. So when his legionaries are being wiped out, he runs away with his cavalry, and they spend the rest of the Boudiccan revolt in a fort, hiding. And they don't come out again until Boudicca is defeated. So the Ninth Legion here doesn't do a very good job. However, with the beginning of the Flavian dynasty in AD 69, when Vespasian is the winner of the Year of the Four Emperors, he decides he wants to get martial glory for the new dynasty. So he orders the units around the empire who can pick a fight to pick a fight to make sure that he gets some military glory. The easiest place to pick a fight actually is in the far north of Britain. So he orders a series of governors, ultimately Agricola, to advance into the far north. And the Ninth Legion then moves from Lincoln and it founds York. So York is founded at this phase of the Roman expansion. And then we come to some important dates. The last time the Legion is mentioned, and remember by the way, the Roman Empire finishes in the west in AD 476. And in Britain, the Romans land here in AD 43, and the Roman province probably falls out of official Roman control about the beginning of the 5th century. So the Romans would have been here for about 350 years, but this is at the beginning of this period. So the last time the Ninth Legion is mentioned in history anywhere ever is by Tacitus, very, very good Roman historian, who's writing a book about his father-in-law, Agricola, who was the governor. So it's a very good PR exercise because he's writing about his own father-in-law. However, it is very good history, and we have in AD 82 the Ninth Legion almost been wiped out in modern Scotland, only just surviving, because Tacitus tells us that Agricola saves it. But he would say that, wouldn't he? But it almost is wiped out, but it still exists. And then in AD 83, you have the Battle of Mons Graupius, probably just south of the Moray Firth, so near Aberdeen, where the Caledonians in the far north are defeated. No Roman legionaries took part in that battle. They stood and watched, probably because they'd suffered so many casualties the preceding 2 or 3 years that Agricola didn't want to risk losing a whole legion, so he made his auxiliaries, and I'll explain the difference in a minute, do all the fighting. Then, at some stage between AD 104 and 120, a unit of the 9th is deployed to Nijmegen, which was a Roman fort in the Rhine Delta. And we know that because some 9th Legion tiles have been found there with the 9th Legion stamp. And then the last time it's mentioned at all in epigraphy, so an inscription, is in AD 108, when it's recorded on a memorial slab above one of the gateways into Roman York, as the Romans were replacing the original wooden fort with a stone-built fort. So the two key dates there are AD 82, last time in history, AD 108, last time in epigraphy. And remember, this is the only Roman legion we don't know what happened to. Others did disappear, but we know what happened to them. This mysteriously disappeared, just like a Doctor Who episode. Actually, it became a Doctor Who episode. Then in 122, we have Hadrian coming to Britain, initiating building Hadrian's Wall, bringing with him a new legion, 6th Victrix, which replaces the 9th in York. So the 9th has now left York. So there's another date. 82, AD 82, last time mentioned in history. AD 108, last time it's in an epigraphy. AD 122, it's gone from York, so it's gone somewhere. In the AD 120s, when Hadrian's Wall is built, every Roman military unit in Britain participates, and they all leave inscriptions. There's no inscription from the 9th Legion, so it's not there. And finally, AD 168, in the reign of Marcus Aurelius, Richard Harrison Gladiator, he orders a list of all the extant, so existing Roman legions, to be carved into a column in Rome. And there are 31, but the 9th isn't there, so it's definitively gone. So there you get hard dates. So I'll read this. Of these hard facts, 5 are the most important regarding the fate of the 9th. Namely, it's last mentioned in literature in AD 82, in an inscription in AD 108, was replaced in York by 6 Victrix in 122. There are no inscriptions on Hadrian's Wall, and it is missing on Marcus Aurelius's column. So, they're your hard dates. So, I'll now briefly talk about a Roman legion. So, at this stage of the Roman Empire, it's called the Principate. So, it's the first half of the Roman Empire. You have 31 legions, 5,500 men each. That is a Roman legion. You've got the first cohort, the largest cohort. You've got some scouting cavalry there. You've got all the key officers here. So the general, you've got the eagle standard bearer there, the aquilifer. You've got 5 junior officers, etc. That's the Roman legion, 5,500 men. All of them are fighting men. And within that, 1,200 are also specialists doing other things. They could be stonemasons, they could be carpenters, they could be sword fletchers, they could be, sword cutlers or arrow fletchers. They could be specialists at making artillery. So that legion could do any task it needed to keep itself in the field. It's highly mobile. It can't do everything itself though, so what the Romans did was they had half of their army called auxiliaries, which were lesser soldiers but still more or less as good as anything they'd fight, had slightly less good equipment, but that included all the cavalry. So half the force coming through here in the late AD 40s are legionaries and half are auxiliaries. That is a classic Principate, early Imperial Roman legionary. The great thing about the Romans is they were brilliant at nicking other people's ideas. So every piece of kit there on a classic Roman legionary is nicked from another nation the Romans fought. So the helmet is called an Imperial Gallic helmet. The clue's in the name, originally Gallic, and then the Romans added stuff onto it. The shield, I'm going to show you one in a minute, the scutum. The scutum is Spanish or Samnite. The gladius hispaniensis, the clue's in the name for the sword, Spanish. The weighted javelins, the pilums, probably Spanish as well. The loricus segmentata banded iron armour, and remember what that looks like for my last 2 slides. That is based on gladiator armour, which was originally used by the Etruscans who lived in modern Tuscany. So all the kit there is nicked over 2 or 3 centuries by the Romans to create this panoply, which makes the Roman legionary of this period probably the best equipped military man until probably the high Middle Ages. And I've filmed wearing loricus segmentata. I've worn Roman kit for an entire day, in fact 2 days filming on Hadrian's Wall. And actually once it's on, it's pretty easy to actually carry. The weight distributes itself very well over your shoulders and across your stomach. What you can't do though is put it on yourself. So a fellow legionary has to effectively strap you into it and then put the shoulder protectors on as well. So it takes about an hour. And any reenactor will tell you that keeping loricus segmentata, even the imitation stuff, fit to use is very difficult because it rusts easily and it's got lots of clasps on which can fall off. So at the end of every day's march, the Roman legionary, once they've done everything else I'm going to tell you about in a minute, had to clean their armour. If you don't, then it'll fall apart. So the Roman legionary was trained in a very specific fencing technique, which I'm going to demonstrate. But you can see here the various phases of a legionary at the beginning of the Roman Empire. With his Imperial Gallic helmet, he's got lorica hamata chainmail armour. So the enemy's coming towards him. We'll start off on the left. On the left-hand side, you can see he's about to throw his first pilum javelin, the lighter one. So it's a javelin with a very long prong, and it's got a lead weight as well. So it's basically an armour-piercing javelin. It's designed to bend on impact to stop a shield being used. So the first one is thrown about 40 metres away from the enemy at the most. The second one, the heavy one, is thrown at point blank range. So it's designed to bring the opponents down, at which point the Roman legionary will pull his gladius. The legionary always wears his gladius on the right hand side. So he pulls it down and then goes straight into the guard, and then he's ready. He sets like this, and then the fencing technique is designed to take the blow from the opponent first, which opens the opponent up, and then he can do 2 killing blows into the upper or lower thorax, and both of them are immediate killing blows. So if your opponent's not used to it, it's like an industrial scale killing machine. When Paulinus defeated Boudicca, he was facing odds of 10-1 at the best. If we go with Cassius Dio's numbers, 10,000 Romans to 250,000 native Britons. Even taking into account that's clearly an exaggeration, they are really, really difficult odds. And yet Paulinus, on his A game, butchered the Britons. And that's how Boudicca fell. So let me show you how this technique works. I'm going to put the mic down now. So I'll talk as loudly as I can, but I'm going to need both hands, and I'm going to need this gentleman here. Come and join me. So this gentleman, what's your name? Nigel. So Nigel is a native Briton, right? So he's a local Coritani, and I'm a Roman legionary in the 9th. So what we're going to do, so you've got a long sword, and you're just going to try and slash at him like that. So your sword is a cutting sword, quite a long one, bendy, not very good. But if you look at this shield, this is a thank you Paul from Doncaster Museums has come down today, Paul Robinson, and he kindly lent me this very good imitation scutum. So the first thing to look at is, it's a full body shield, right? It's given me amazing protection. And also, I can put it into a testudo, but largely it's there to enable me to use this fencing technique. Nigel, 1 second. So here's my gladius, which is a stabbing sword. So the only really sharp bits are up here. So. Right, so there we go. So you're attacking me. I've thrown the 2 javelins. You've made it through the javelin shower. Right. So now try and bring your sword, pretend, on top of it. Right? Let's go. And it's now opened up, and he's dead, or he's dead. And the thing to look at here in this sword, this is a very, very good. By the way, that was amazing. Thank you, mate. What if I wait for you to move first? I just push you over. The heat of battle. The heat of battle. Nigel, you've done very well to make it through the jammers and the ballista. So, Nigel, everybody, thank you. So this really is an industrial scale killing machine. 5,500 men, all of them fencing in the same way. And every piece of kit on that Roman legionary is also a psychological weapon. So, firstly, everything makes a noise. Lorica segmentatus clanging, hobnail boots crunching through the earth. The cingulum leather straps here with metal fittings, jangling. 5,500 of them, so you would know the Roman legion's coming for you. So you've got to be really, really tough to actually stand up to them, let alone fight them. If you stand up to them, then you've done very well, because you know what's coming. But what's coming is this. This gladius is a very good replica. It's missing something which most swords have, including Roman swords, but not the gladius, the legionary sword. It's got no blood runnels. So there'd be 2 grooves either side. So when the sword's in, and remember, I'm part of an industrial scale killing machine. So the idea is the sword comes out quick and I can do it again. But with no blood runnels, the blood can't go out and the air can't go in. So the sword, once it's in, is stuck. But the Roman legionary is more, in terms of build, like a middleweight Olympic weightlifter than anything else. Square and muscle, literally that. It does nothing but march, fight and build. March, fight, build. March, fight, build. So it's all muscle. So when the sword's in, to get it out quickly, he gives it a massive twist and then pulls it out, which leaves a gaping wound, which is there deliberately. This sword was used for 500 years. And the Romans on other swords, cavalry swords, they did use blood runnels. So it's deliberate to send a psychological message that if you stand up to me, Nigel, you know what's coming, mate. You know what's coming. That is your Roman legionary. Thank you, Paul. Brilliant. And there you go. That's Trajanic legionaries fighting the Dacians north of the Danube in modern Romania. There you can see that the sword's going down. The Roman legionary is taking the blow on the shield and then gutting the opponent in a lower thorax stab there. Also, this is very important for this talk, at the end of every day's march in Roman territory, the Roman legion and any Roman military unit built a marching camp, which is basically a temporary full fat fort. So they would dig a ditch, they would use the earth to build a bank, they would take the stakes off their own backs and build a palisade at the end of every day's march, and then when they moved on, they'd slight it so the natives couldn't use it. It's like the law for the Romans at the end of every day's march. So there's the Roman legionaries having marched for 6 hours. So they got up, had breakfast, knocked the fort down, marched for 6 hours, spent 3 hours building a fort, clean the armour, make your bread, a few hours sleep, and then crack on. They're brilliant for archaeologists because they leave crop marks. And if the soil's good, and the soil around here on the magnesium limestone is fantastic because it's so alkaline, they leave really good crop marks. So you can join them as dot to dots. So we know where all the Roman campaigns were in Scotland because we can join for each campaign the dot for dot. So again, there's your ditch and bank. That's a Roman marching camp being built, which you'd have had at least 2 around here. I'm going to show you later. That's what a Roman marching camp would look like. So ditch, if you're really in enemy territory, you dig a double or triple ditch. Ditch, bank, palisade, lay out inside like a normal Roman fort, a couple of wooden towers on the gateways, maybe on the corners. Remember, the following day, they're knocking that down. So, and they keep going and keep going and keep going. It's one of the reasons why natives fighting them anywhere in the Roman world found it so difficult, was because they were relentless. Once the button was pressed to get the legion on the march, it's almost impossible to stop. And that's what crop marks look like from Roman marching camps. So you can see the square shapes, looking especially the one at the top there, that playing card corner, that's absolutely classic for a Roman marching camp. So that's what Roman marching camps look like in the archaeological record, and I'll show you your local ones later. So let's go through the hypotheses about what happened to it, then I'll go through the local, the 9th Legion locally for you. So the first theory of 4, lost in the north. If you want to know what the Romans thought of the Britons in the far north, that's it. So very clearly, the Romans are the lion, and very clearly, the Brigantes, looking at you, David, are the lamb. That's from Corbridge. That was originally a mausoleum decoration which became the fountainhead in Corbridge. It's absolutely beautiful, but that tells you everything you need to know about how the Romans thought of the Britons in the far north. So the Romans were always fighting the far north. So the theory, firstly, is it was lost in the far north, which is Rosemary Sutcliffe's theory. That's Roman York, so that was founded by the 9th Legion. And then the Roman 9th Legion disappeared, it becomes the home of 6 Victrix. That's the Roman fort and canvas settlement which held the northern frontier for 350 years. You've got the legionary fortress at the top. York Minster today, if you want to get your eye in, is beneath the 2 big buildings in the middle of the fortress, which is the Principia headquarters and the Praetorian commander's house. and then you've got the Canada civilian settlement south of the River Ouse. The bridge over the Ouse is probably in the same place that the bridge is today, and then the railway museum and railway station are over here. So that is Roman York, founded by the 9th Legion. That's the gateway in York, which the 9th Legion built just before it disappeared, which has the AD 108 inscription on it. That is the inscription, which usually, when you go in the wonderful Yorkshire Museum, is the first thing you see above you as you walk in. That is the actual inscription, which is the last ever mention of the 9th Legion. Now, when Hadrian became the emperor in 117, one of the Roman contemporary sources writes, when he took over the empire, Hadrian reverted to an earlier policy, devoting his energies to keeping the peace throughout the world. So he moves from the offence to defence. The people subdued by Trajan, who he replaced, rebelled. The Moors, North Africa, were launching attacks. The Sarmatians, who are an Iranian steppe people north of the Danube, were making war, and the Britons could not be kept under control. It's a common theme for the Romans in Britain: they can't keep us under control. Same today. So Hadrian becomes the emperor, and there's trouble. And then the sources say the trouble's so bad that actually a Roman emergency expedition is sent to the north, comprised of units from 4 legions, with a highly experienced general put in charge of them, who comes from North Africa, and they go to the far north. And in my view, that probably indicates that the 9th has been defeated around AD 120, and these are an emergency replacement for a period of time before Hadrian brings the new legion in 122. And this is the first time we see Britannia on a coin. So Britannia is basically Athena or Minerva. Minerva is the Roman goddess of wisdom and military strategy, and that's where Britannia comes from. This is the first coin ever minted with Britannia on it. It's from about AD 120, and it's called Britannia in mourning, because it's thought it was minted to record a bad event in Britain, which may be the disappearance of the Legion. So if it was lost in the north, what could it have been doing? Either it was lost campaigning in Scotland and destroyed, or it was lost campaigning against the rebellion south of the frontier, which became Hadrian's Wall, and was lost, or a combination of both. So like a Boudiccan revolt, but in the far north. And then Hadrian comes over with his emergency reserves and then brings the new legion. And the reason in this theory why we don't know what happened to it was lost. It lost so badly, it had something called a memoria damnatio declared against it by the Emperor and the Senate, which means it's wiped from history. It never existed. So that's theory 1, lost in the north. This one's quite interesting. This is a new theory, which I'm doing a TV show about next year. Was the 9th Legion lost in the south? So 3 pieces of evidence from London, all Hadrianic, so post 117. Firstly, so this is Roman London, which is the city today. By the way, the wonderful thing about the city of London is the square mile is basically the city within the Roman wall. So the Romans actually delineated the square mile to this day. So there is the modern city of London. Here, that's the Walbrook, which is a stream, very steep banked, now canalised, so you can't see it. It's called the Walbrook, and it bisected Roman London in half. And in this upper area where you can see the red dots, hundreds of Roman skulls have been found, which are decapitated in some kind of execution. And they've all got wound marks on the head as well. So they're either battlefield casualties or deliberate executions. And there are hundreds. And the reason why the skulls stay is because when the bodies are washed or deliberately put in the river and decompose, the bit that which stays together the longest is the skull. So you've got hundreds of skulls dating to between 117 and 130 in the upper reaches of the Walbrook in London. You have the Hadrianic fire in London. So the first fire of London was when Boudica burnt it. The second fire was the Hadrianic fire, when it was burnt in the reign of Hadrian, and that was a deliberate torching event because the archaeological record shows the fires had deliberately started at the front of buildings on the streets. So at some stage in the reign of Hadrian, who we all think is a great emperor because of Hadrian's Wall, etc., there was a lot of trouble in London. And then finally, the Romans built a fort, the Cripplegate Fort, inside London. The Romans never built forts inside cities. It was illegal in the Roman period to carry a weapon, unless you were a Praetorian Guardsman, inside the religious boundary of a town or a city. So for the Romans to build a fort inside a city, and that was the provincial capital by then, is a big deal. So if you put those three things together, something's happening in London in the 120s that's not right. And the TV programme, by the way, before I go to the TV programme, so this is Roman London of the period. So that's the Walbrook there. That's the Basilica and Forum, the official market and courthouse, which is beneath Leadenhall Market today, or as we know in Harry Potter, that's where they filmed Diagon Alley. So that's the central Roman London. This is the Governor's Palace here. You'll notice at this period there's no wall, but they've just built the Cripplegate Fort there inside the religious boundary. This is the city, the West End of Westminster, just round the bend there. So that's Roman, Hadrianic London. They're three of the skulls, and the production team and I have got access to about 100 of the skulls. So we're going to do some analysis using various scientific techniques to work out where those skulls come from. Because if they're from the 9th Legion, the 9th recruited in North Africa and Spain. So if they come from there, we may have identified former members of the 9th Legion. There's the burning event. There's the new Cripplegate Fort being built. So, in this second theory, I've got two to come. Second theory, lost in the south. The 9th Legion is the legion that rebels around the time of the accession of Hadrian. Remember, there's trouble in Britain. In London, the rebellion is put down by headhunting auxiliaries. These auxiliary Roman troops were often recruited on the Rhine Delta, so from Belgium and Holland, and they were renowned headhunters, right? So counterintuitively, it turns out some of the toughest fighters in the Roman War were from Belgium. Tough guys. A lot of the units on Hadrian's Wall were from Belgium. Or the 9th Legion is wiped out trying to defeat a rebellion against the accession of Hadrian. So the knight comes down to put down a rebellion and is defeated. So either it's the bad guys or the good guys that they lose. Either case, the skulls will be those of the legionaries if this hypothesis is true. Lost in the south. Lost on the Rhine or Danube. So we now move to the northern frontier. So we have these tiles from probably about AD 110, which are stamped in Nijmegen, so this is on the Rhine, by the 9th Legion. That's where Nijmegen is. So basically the frontier is along the Rhine, and Nijmegen is one of the main legionary fortresses. Legionary fortress is big enough to house an entire legion. So in Britain, at that time, Caerleon in southeast Wales was the legionary fortress home to Legio II Augusta. Chester was a legionary fortress, home to Legio XX Biliary Victrix, and York, at the end of this period, before Hadrian comes, was home to the 9th Legion. So that's a legionary fortress, which looked like that. That's the province it was in, so that's Germania Superior. And there's one of the stamped tiles. So we can place a unit from the 9th Legion around AD 110 in Nijmegen. Around then. But that's it. And the theory now is it was only a small unit which had been deployed there as an emergency for a brief period, which was there when the main legion was lost. The two conflicts it could have been lost in if it was lost on the Rhine and Danube were either Trojans' conquest of Dacia, but there's no record of it, or in the Marcomannic Wars, which is the conflict which is at the beginning of Gladiator, but there's no record of it. The final theory, lost in the east, so we're going to Syria and Egypt. three candidate conflicts where it could have been lost. So this would have had the 9th deploying from Britain to the eastern frontier in Syria. There's a very good looking archaeologist leading a tour there, which is the Archant Titus in the Forum Romanum, which is relevant. So, the first campaign could have been Trajan's eastern campaign in 114 to 117 when he conquered the Parthian Persian Empire all the way through to the Persian Gulf. That's one, because that started a rebellion, and the rebellion was very sanguineous. The second Jewish revolt. The third Jewish revolt was even more sanguineous, the Bar Kokhba revolt, when the Romans were almost kicked out of the Near East. And it took about 10 legions, so a third of their entire manpower in legions, to defeat that revolt. So it could have been lost there. Finally, remember it's not on the column in 168. So there's a conflict in 161 to 166 called the Roman-Parthian War in Syria, where again we think Roman troops suffered heavy casualties. So those three could be candidates. So that is the Roman Empire of this period. So there's Britannia, frontier on Hadrian's Wall. We're about here, just above the N, or one of the N's. There's the eastern frontier. So the legion's going a long way, actually. If it's been deployed to the eastern frontier, that's a long way. There's the Bar Kokhba revolt. So the Romans actually lost probably about half a legion there at the beginning of it, but it wasn't the 9th. There's the Roman-Parthian War. Again, the Romans lost a lot of legionaries there, but again, we don't think it was the 9th. So this is the last slide for what happened to the 9th. So I'll read you basically what I said in the last paragraph in the book. Based on the hard and other facts set out above and my wider knowledge of the Roman world and military, the least likely hypothesis regarding the fate of the 9th is that it was lost fighting on the Rhine and Danube. The next least likely hypothesis is that the legion was lost in the east. Moving on, the Hadrianic War in London theory has to be considered a serious candidate, and we'll know after we test those scores next year on camera. But I actually think Rosemary Sutcliffe was right. I think the legion was actually lost in the far north of Britain, and it was defeated so badly that the Romans declared a memorial damnatio against it, so it never existed. So that's why there's no evidence of what happened to it. So now, that's where I would normally stop. But I'm going to bring you back here for 5 minutes to talk about the 9th Legion coming through here. Before I do, I'm just going to have a sip of Coke. Are you ready?
This is the exciting bit.
So we know the broad narrative in the late AD 40s. The emperor orders the legions in Britain to expand the province from the southeast. The 9th is the legion which goes into the East Midlands and then doglegs back to the North Sea. So they build Ratier, which is Leicester, that's Leicester. They build Lincoln, an amazing place to go, almost as good, David, as York. Almost. An amazing place to go if you want to see the Roman world in Lincoln. They build Lincoln as well, and we're in the middle. And then, so that's the conquest period when the 9th is moving through, and they move through here. Then we move into this frontier zone 20 years before the emperor then, the Flavians, order the conquest of the far north. So we go from a conquest period when the 9th moves through to a frontier period when the 9th will still be here holding the frontier, through to a provincial period after the frontier's gone to the line of Hadrian's Wall, when we're really a key component in the centre of Roman Britain. One of the great things about coming back, because I'm from Mansfield, one of the great things about coming back here is to be able to tell the story of this part of the world in the Roman period, because most historians focus on the far north of Scotland or on Wales or on the southeast, but this is really an untold story actually here, because it was a really important part of Roman Britain in 3 phases: conquest, frontier, provincial. And that is the river gate at Lincoln, so that's Roman Lincoln. That's a very steep walk, by the way, to get to the legionary fortress, which, by the way, you can see from almost adjacent to Whitwell Wood. You can see Lincoln Cathedral. So remember, Lincoln was founded as a Roman legionary fortress. And let's remind ourselves who we are. We're the Coriol Tauvi in the middle. the Midlanders. This looks confusing, but I'll explain because it's not. It's just a Google Earth image actually of us. So that's Creswell, there's Clown, there's the M1, there's Whitwell Wood, there's Cookney. Cookney's going to feature in this presentation. So where you have the yellow, they're known Roman sites which are listed in the Historic Environment Record. Nobody's questioning what they are. They are absolutely nailed on Roman, right? Already recorded, already investigated. So Camp Hill is a Roman marching camp. Markland Grips is a late Iron Age hill fort. So that's the local tribal centre that the Romans hit as a speed bump moving from Leicester to Lincoln. And there are some very enigmatic Roman buildings in Whitwell Wood, particularly the D-shaped enclosures, which I'll show you in a minute, because they were found when they were excavated to be full of Derbyshire-ware local Roman pottery. So the buildings, they've clearly been used as dumps later, so the buildings predate the later Roman period when Derbyshire-ware was being made. The red dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, are new sites that myself and a team of local enthusiasts and experts are now looking at as potential new additions. And the plan is, over the next 3 or 4 months, to investigate them properly, and already 2 of them are going to be added to the Historic Environment Record as potential new Roman sites. So, we have the line of a potential Roman road here off Gapsick Lane, because I personally don't think that's the original route of Gapsick Lane when it goes around Markland Grips. I think the original route, having been told this by Andy Blagg, is Andy here? Oh, he's there. This is Andy's idea, and I think he's right. So we think there's a line of a Roman, the original line of Gapsick Lane goes actually through the field, past where the coin hoard was found, straight over Markland Grips, onto Markland Lane, and through Elmton. So you might have the route of a Roman road and maybe a roadside settlement where Elmton is. So that's something to investigate. We have 2 new Roman camps above the Sheffield Road. By the way, I knew none of this, and this is true, is it not, Sarah? Yeah. Until I came here and I started looking. And actually, most of these things you can find if you know where to look. So if you want to, come and talk to me afterwards and I'll explain where to find all this information. I live there on Hazelmere Road. So from my back window, I can actually see the 3 new Roman sites and Markland Grips. And from my front windows, I can see Camp Hill. So I've been plonked in the middle of a Roman landscape. But finally also, there's a fantastic group doing research about whether Cookney was the site of the Battle of Hatfield in the 7th century. But actually, I think there's an earlier potential Roman site there as well. So I'll show you those in detail. So this is the LiDAR image. If you want to do this yourself, the website is called Archae, A-R-C-H-I, Archae UK. Archae UK. And it gives you access for free to LiDAR, which is a laser mapping device which removes vegetation and buildings, so all you get are contours. LiDAR and antique maps and historic environment records of everywhere in the UK. So this is LiDAR for us. That's the quarry. We're about here, Hazelmere Road's here, that's Markland Grips. So on there, you can see the key local sites. So you've got Camp Hill is that, the 2 new campsites are here, and the line of the new roads there. So let's go through them. That's a detailed image of Markland Grips. So it's a promontory hill fort. So it's a very, very good place to defend. And in the Iron Age, before the Romans came, they built a triple ditch and bank here with an entrance there, which in many places you can still see, it's very prominent, as a redoubt in times of trouble, which is great unless your opponents have got artillery, which the Romans did, because then it's useless, as we'll see. So, Markland Grips, late Iron Age hill fort. Personally, and the research will show this either way, I think the entire area inside the grips, not just the promontory, was actually a big tribal centre. And I think that's what the speed bump was the knight hit as it moved through to Lincoln. That is a drone shot of Markland Grips, which is a superb image actually. You can see it down in the background there, then dropping off into the valley and then the peak on the far side. So this is the promontory hill fort. Then at the back, either side, I think that's actually a really big tribal centre. And I think the promontory hill fort is where they went to, as I say, in times of trouble. But the whole thing is going to be a densely occupied late Iron Age landscape. Late Iron Age is immediately before the Romans. So this is a close-up looking at the triple ditch and bank. So if we go back, we're going to look at this. So that's the triple ditch and bank, which is so significant, 2,000 years old or more, it's still there today. And it still didn't help the locals because the ninth won. Why did the ninth win? By the way, just to show you how normal it is to have a promontory hill fort redoubt, this is another one which is in Kent, which was also 10 minutes from my last house where we lived in Merriworth. So it's actually very common, it's not unusual. Just unusual that I keep finding them everywhere. So this is Camp Hill. So Camp Hill is definitely a Roman fort. So if you think about the Romans coming broadly 30, 40 kilometres wide front, Leicester to Lincoln, coming through the northern part of there, they hit the tribal centre. First thing they do to do a reconnaissance is to build a first marching camp. So that, I think, is a Roman marching camp. As they arrive, the 9th, you can see it there on the LiDAR. Unusually, actually, it's even better on aerial photographs. So there you can actually see the ditch. You see the ditch? Here, the square in the middle. You see the entrance here? So that's Camp Hill, which is definitely a Roman camp. First new one. So I'm not going to tell you exactly where it is, but this is the far side of the Sheffield Road. So the Romans arrive, build Camp Hill, evaluate what's going on. They realise they're going to have to spend a bit of time getting rid of these pesky locals. So they go on the far side, 30 metres higher than the grips, and they build another camp to its north to close it off. So a camp to the north, a camp to the south. This is 30 metres higher. And then they start building artillery platforms next to it with clear lines of sight, 30 metres below you, probably about 400 metres away, in the grips. Each one of those is big enough to put 2 or 3 ballistas in, which are built and operated by legionaries, always legionaries, never auxiliaries. And I think probably, if this hypothesis is correct and we'll test it, we'll probably fire a few bolts or big stones with great force into the grips, and the natives think, hold on, that's not meant to happen, what's that? It's like a laser or something, and they give in. So I think you have a very short-lived Battle of Creswell, almost the not Battle of Creswell, and there's no evidence that the Romans fought a major battle here yet. So I think they came here, took out the tribal centre, which surrendered, became part of the Roman world, initially as a frontier, later in the province, and then the knights moved on to Newton-on-Trent and then on to Lincoln. So I think they're artillery platforms. And Tim, Andy and I stood on them yesterday, and the big one in the middle is so obviously a Roman artillery platform. It screams at you. The Romans do the same everywhere they go. It's a feature of the Romans, everywhere in the empire all the time. If you go to Masada and look at the Roman siege of Masada in Israel, it's exactly the same. Marching camps, north and south, artillery platforms. And that's a drone shot of that artillery platform there. So my house is just down there. So that is basically looking towards Markland Grips there, so you can fire straight into it. And then a number of people have mentioned it to me today about Whitwell Wood. There is a lot of interesting features in Whitwell Wood, a lot of interesting features. A lot of them are Roman. The 2 key ones in the historic environment record already are those 2 D-shaped enclosures there and there. which are more or less sort of here-ish. And we studied them yesterday, actually, and they're huge. I mean, I thought they were Tyler's, but actually they're not, they're huge. And they were full of shards of Derbyshire ware pottery, so it was used as a dump at some stage. So they're probably from the earlier rather than the later Roman period. So again, there's going to have to be a full investigation, and there will be. Finally, we'll come on to the line of the new road, which is important because if it's true, it does link up the Whitwell Wood area through Creswell into Elmton through Markland Grips. So this is Andy's research. So Andy Blake said to me the first time that we met, he's often wondered if where you have the dog leg here, going that way around the grips from Gapsick Lane, if there was originally a straight section here from the Roman road, because that's where you would naturally cross into the grips, where you can actually access the grips. So we just looked on the LiDAR and it's there straight away. This line here. So going between the pylons. Now the interesting thing there is, we actually walked its route yesterday, there's nothing visible on the ground. So whatever that is, it's not recent. So the crop mark is showing that whatever's beneath the surface today has differential soil and vegetation to what it would naturally be. So there is something, if it's Roman or not, we don't know yet, but there is something down there, and it does line up exactly, if you go straight through the grips, with Markland Lane. So there is the initial research for some of the new sites. This is Cookney. So there you have in the middle the church. It's a very big church, by the way, for a small village. Yeah. Here. And we know there was an excavation there in the 1950s. Well, when the NCV built the concrete platform beneath it in the 50s, they found a lot. They found burial pits, so it indicates there was almost certainly a battle locally, which may well be the Battle of Hatfield, where King Edwin was killed. And it's within the church, the ditch of the 12th century Motte Bailey Castle. So you've got a church built in the bailey of the castle. And actually the churchyard is in the motte, the mound where the keep would have been. So that's all normal for an early medieval site, but this isn't. The triple ditch and bank there, that's not Dark Age or medieval. If that is a triple ditch and bank, that's Roman. So you've got a potentially new Roman site there as well. And intriguingly, when you stand where the artillery platform is and the camp north of the Sheffield Road, you can see from there Cookney Church, so you'll be able to see a signal tower there, and you can also see Camp Hill. So they're all visible to each other. So you can imagine if that is Roman, it's part of this broad push through with the knights coming through here in the late AD 40s. And finally, archaeology. Through Tim and Andy, we've been very fortunate to start meeting some of the local farmers who've got wonderful collections, but Simon Carr in particular has got some amazing stuff. So this is Simon Carr's Roman find box. And he's immediately north of the Sheffield Road. Top left, circled, is this. That is one of the copper alloy fittings from Lorica Segmentata. So that means there was a Roman legionary there in Lorica Segmentata, banded iron armour, who lost a bit of kit. So it places a Roman legionary there. But even more important, if you go to the middle, if you go to the third circle and look above it, you'll see a weight. That's from a grommer. So a grommer is a Roman sighting device only used by legionaries. The surveyor had a name in the legion, it was called an agrimensal. So we have there fittings from Lorica Segmentata and from a Roman sighting device only used by legionaries here. So that's hard evidence to add to the new research. So that's where we're beginning. Okay, so that's the end of the talk. I'll take any questions. They're my contacts and some of my books. Thank you very much.